Let's be honest, mainline Pokemon games have never had good stories or characters for the most part, with the exception of maybe Generation 5. Most Pokemon game plotlines were extremely dumbed down, so even the lowest common denominator can understand them. But also, to be fair, these Pokemon games were never trying to be plot driven in the first place. They are primarily gameplay focused RPGs, based around battling, similar to something like maybe Dark Souls or even Elder Scrolls, where usually the gameplay takes precedent over the main storyline for most players. This is good if you just want to play the game and not have to worry about cutscenes or characters or dialogue or whatever. You can just focus on training your Pokemon. But this is why the ROM hack, Pokemon Adventure Red Chapters, is such a brilliant and unique Pokemon game. Not only is the quality very good, but it's also unlike any other Pokemon game that I've ever seen, with a staggering amount of content, attention to detail, and most surprisingly, a very deep and intricate plot filled with fleshed out characters, twists and turns, and a very dark adult take on the Pokemon world. Basically edgy Pokemon, but in a good way. You may have heard of this ROM hack, but basically, this is a game that tells the story of Trainer Red, and I mean the true original story of the iconic character that we all know and love. You all know about Red's adventure in Pokemon Fire Red and Origins the anime, but Adventure Red is a complete adaptation of the original Pokemon Japanese manga, which is technically a spin-off of Generation 1, rewriting Red's journey as he becomes a Pokemon trainer and grows as a character while discovering all kinds of crazy shit along the way. There are some debates about the canonicity of the manga, but I guess you can compare it to Dragon Ball Super, where the manga and the anime were both separate continuities. Adventure Red was such an engaging experience to play, and I absolutely recommend it to anyone who wants a Pokemon game that's fresh, plot driven, and way more mature. I'll be explaining why exactly this game is so good. I'll be analysing the plot in depth, along with some of the great quality of life changes and gameplay features this game has to offer also. So obviously, there will be spoilers here, you've been warned. I recommend you play this also. So let's take a closer look at the plot. Games with good gameplay are good, but a game with a great plot is very memorable. A well written story will really pull you into the game that you're playing and make you far more invested in it, especially if it's your first time playing. Unsurprisingly, games like Pokemon Emerald do not have good stories, hardly anyone will argue otherwise, whereas games like Mass Effect Trilogy are incredible in this regard. Now, there are 3 things, roughly, that makes a game storyline good. An interesting plot with events that drag you into the game and ideally has a lot of stakes and tension, such as Mass Effect. The characters, which is just as important. Who do you meet during the game? Are there character conflicts, flaws and nuances? And most importantly, character development and arcs. I'll say Final Fantasy 7 and 10 really come to mind on this. Last of all, the world building of the game can be very important. Having a game world which is not only interesting, but fun to explore. A well written and fleshed out game world can tell you about the game itself without having to actually tell you. It rewards the player for exploring and being smart enough to figure things out on their own. I guess Dark Souls is a really good example of this. Though the plot was really obscure and didn't make that much sense at first glance, if you're really astute and you really pay attention to your surroundings, you'll realise that the game is so much deeper than you might have originally thought. Pokemon Adventure Red does well in these regards, though not all of these characters are like Game of Thrones level of well written. Trainer Red is kinda just a standard hero character. He does have a huge amount of dialogue, which on its own is a drastic change from the mainline Pokemon games. The fact that this game has these NPC emotes whenever they talk, like Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, not only helps bring people to life like Trainer Red, but also adds a lot of personality to him and all of the other NPCs that he interacts with. As Red, you get entangled in all these ridiculous situations, and seeing how he reacts to it is really entertaining. The plot of this game can be dark. Oh boy. The original manga had some of the most absurd moments in Pokemon I've ever seen, and no wonder a lot of this got censored in the US version. And yes, all of these ridiculous moments are in this game. Team Rocket are actual bad guys this time. They enslave and kill people in Pokemon. They have bomb collars in their own Team Rocket grunts and kill them whenever they disobey their masters. People try to kill you multiple times, despite you playing as an 11-year-old boy. People get butchered by Pokemon. Sometimes you'll win a battle, then once you let your guard down, the opponent will make their Pokemon sucker punch you and flat out try to kill you and cheat. your rival's Raticate explicitly dies and he goes to bury it. A flipping Arbok gets sliced in half. Literally, what the fuck just happened? There's so much more to talk about. But then, there's just sexual content. Oh god. This really starts to cross the line at times. There's a scene where the female character Green, or Blue I guess as the Japanese version swapped the rival names. In a battle she had Pokeballs under her dress where her chest is and surprises her opponent by ripping her dress open mid-battle, exposing the balls in her chest and whapping out a Jigglypuff and a Clefairy to catch her opponent off guard. Well, what do you expect? It's Japan, those filthy weeps. Now the scene is funny, I'll admit, as it's so ridiculous. But then you realise that Trainer Green is actually 11 years old. Yikes! This ain't it, Chief. Major Pepega right there. Oh, but it gets worse, trust me. In the uncensored version of the manga, Misty looks like this, and has a scene where she's groping herself while showing an unreasonable amount of skin. It's pretty uncomfortable. Only to find out that Ash, Brock and another kid were also in that same spot, completely naked, watching her this entire time. You might think that this is just Japanese people being perverted, as usual. Until you realise that Ash and Misty are maybe like 12 or 13 years old here. You know what, I'm not even going to comment on that. This is definitely a more mature Pokemon game. Even random NPCs use a lot of crude humour, witty jokes or pop culture references that are self-aware. These random interactions are often really nice to see, as Red will usually answer back with a really funny reaction. When you get to play as rival Blue for a very short time, you get to completely roast people and flat out call them autistic to their faces, which was really funny. I definitely chuckled a few times during my playthrough. It also needs to be said that unlike the mainline games, this Pokemon world is geographically completely different. The Kanto region this time around is so much more developed and fleshed out than it's ever been before, to resemble the manga version more. The towns are completely overhauled, they're so much bigger with far more areas to explore in them, NPCs to talk to, things to do, and even side quests, which is a really big thing in this game. Kanto in this game felt a lot more dense and alive than before, whereas Pallet Town was literally like 2 houses in a Pokemon lab. Now it resembles more of an actual town, and the fact that all NPCs in this game are named people is another thing that really breathed life into this world and made it more like believable, I guess. And oh baby, the presentation is really well done. The cutscenes are really well made, and so much better than what Gen 3 ever did. What the developer managed to achieve was pretty awesome. The cutscenes feel more like that of a proper video game. The character and Pokemon sprite interactions do so much more in this game than Gen 3 ever did, and can to a certain extent actually act out what's happening on the screen. Like here, how rival Blue pretends to be dead so Koga's Muck will drop its guard, thus allowing him to counterattack with his Cypher. I love this change. Everything felt a lot more alive than ever, and way more exciting in this way. And while the core principles of the main Pokemon series is still kind of here, you play as Red, collect gym badges and challenge a Pokemon League, it also simultaneously completely flips these traditions on its head. The game starts off very cutscene heavy, it continues to have very interesting plot events throughout the game, but I generally thought this to be entertaining, and while many people complained about the storylines of Generation 7 and 8, as they slowed down the game and weren't really that good. Unlike those games, this game has a very well made story. Everything you already know, like gym challenges, gym leader personalities, Safari Zone, is so much deeper here than it ever has been, and it makes it feel like a completely new experience. Now I want to talk a bit about the characters and how they were changed in this iteration. I really liked Rival Blue, or Green depending on what language you're playing. He felt more complex than Trainer Red, and seeing him have a lot of dialogue and interaction in the story was really cool. You remember this guy from Fire Red? He was kind of just a standard douchebag. He would show up once in a while for 5 seconds, lose to you in a battle, then simply say smell you later and walk off. Man, that's lame in comparison to this game. In Adventure, just like in the manga, he's one of the main characters who helps you take down Team Rocket. He's a relevant character to the plot, and can be a total savage at times, making Fire Red's equivalent look like a total bitch in comparison. Though despite this, I feel that there's more to him than you may think. I grew to like him as, despite how he usually is in Adventure, you can tell that he does have a compassionate side to him. It can be subtle, but the game definitely hints at him being nicer than you might think, but he's simply just too proud to admit it. Also here, he genuinely cares about his home Pallet Town and Professor Oak. They have a good amount of dialogue together. You know, his flipping granddad. whereas in Fire Red, Professor Oak literally favours you the player over his own grandson, which is really weird. During the Sylph Tower arc, he's a genuine hero who risks himself to save the citizens of Paltown, and during the Lavender Tower arc, he openly admits to his selfishness for letting his Raticate die and feels remorse as a result, leading him to changing into being a better person later on. And when you get to play as him very briefly, he's not always a douchebag either. Sometimes he can be pretty polite, which is quite surprising to people like Mr. Fuji. Unlike in Pokemon Origins, where he's literally a one-dimensional troll and that's pretty much the extent of his character. And probably one of the most surprising moments is when Daisy secretly tells you that he actually does consider you to be his friend, but he absolutely does not want you to know because he's just too proud to admit it. This was almost cute to see. Honestly, this complexity makes him an actual character in this game. Like real people, he's multi-layered, flawed, and changes as a person over time. Way more interesting and believable of a character this time around. The other rival, Green, the playable female character from Fire Red, is definitely something here. She's one of the most likeable and unlikable characters at the same time, though I will say she is pretty entertaining. Basically, she gets introduced as a friendly person, only for it to be revealed that she's actually a professional con woman, tricking you the player out of your money. I will admit she does have a massive brain. She uses her Ditto in very clever ways to trick people, such as disguising it as the opponent's Pokemon to make them think that it's their Pokemon when it's actually not. She's also very capable. Reminds me almost of this Catwoman anti-hero trope. One scene I thought was clever was how throughout the game, she bumps into you, and right as you gain her trust, she gives you back the gym badges that she originally stole from you as a gesture of good faith, only for it to be revealed later on that those gym badges that she gave back to you were actually fake, and that she was just thinking 3 steps ahead of you this entire time. This was pretty well done, as it genuinely catches you the player off guard, as well as Trainer Red, along with making you feel really silly for actually believing that Green was finally trustworthy as a person. Her deceitful nature does make you hate her, I sure as hell did, but at the same time she is interesting. I will say that at the end of the Kanto arc, I found it really hard to sympathise with her as a person, but I guess you kind of deserve that. Now, apart from these main characters, there are so many other characters from Fire Red who actually get to do things in this game, like how every single gym leader is now at least somewhat important to the plot. They're more than just random boss battles and inconveniences that you can just plough through with your team. Lieutenant Surge in particular had some proper motivations for doing the things that he did during the game. If only the main games had this level of depth to it. Now, I know that there's so much more about the story and characters I can talk about, I can go on all day. But there's one more thing that I want to talk about before I move on to the gameplay part. Now, I've mentioned all the dark and adult parts of this game and the manga, but I'm yet to tell you about the most disturbing thing that I've ever seen in any Pokemon game. I couldn't believe how insane this got during this one particular side quest, and I've already mentioned the Team Rocket Grunt getting its head blown off by a bomb collar, one of the very few times you get to see a humanized version of a Team Rocket Grunt, then boom. But no, this was way more unsettling. In a side quest you meet a stranger in the middle of nowhere who kindly decides to let you stay the night until the storm wears out. He also cooks for you and seems very nice. Another NPC also seeks shelter from the storm, and Red feels really suspicious about him. Like he's maybe a serial killer or something, who knows. Despite that, you still become good friends with him, but later on once you return to the house, something feels very odd. The house is empty and quiet. You find a hidden entrance to his back garden and... what the actual fuck? You literally find 3 half-eaten decapitated men who beg you to kill them to end their suffering. This just went from 100 to 1000 real quick. The old man who owns this house is secretly a cannibal serial killer who keeps these men alive while gradually eating parts of them. Holy shit. Red gives in and puts these men to sleep forever. And after narrowly escaping certain death in the man's dungeon, you find out that the other person who you became friends with was already killed and eaten. After one last jump scare, Red throws this piece of scum into a lake and drowns him, ending this optional side quest of all things. I'll just let this sequence of events speak for itself, but imagine that Red, an 11-year-old boy, basically ate human flesh, witnessed all of this, was almost killed and eaten himself, and then went on to kill 4 men. This was truly one of the most insane video game moments I've ever seen. So all in all, this game's plot, world building and characters are simply great, albeit it can get really dark at times. We all know this now, but you may be asking me, well, what's the gameplay like? Are there quality of life changes? What about the difficulty? And should I nuzlocke this game? Well, the gameplay is also great, with some flaws obviously, but oh well. The most notable gameplay improvements are the updated quality of life changes. As you can see in the summary menu, this game has a Generation 5 aesthetic, with all the new buffs that Generation 5 brought, like physical special split, moves like tackle getting buffed, and even infinite TMs, which is great. Even though this game mostly has Generation 1 and 2 Pokemon, with the exception of some future generation evolutions being retroactively added in, like Rhyperior. Needless to say, these updates make the game way more fun to play. No more do you have to deal with stupid jank like Butterfree only being able to use physical stab moves. Also, as you can see, the Pokemon's IV values are displayed exactly as in Pokemon Gaia, and later on in the game, you literally get an item which checks the exact EV and IV values on each Pokemon. Now that is pretty cool. Apart from these changes, the game functions pretty similar to a standard Pokemon game. The only main difference is that battles can be quite different due to the plot driven nature of the game. They will be a lot more scripted and be different from the main games in some regards. But these battles are also pretty balanced as the developer makes sure that you've got what you need to progress through the plot. Such as how in the early game you have to fight a Cypher early game, which is usually really tough at your level, but if you reach that same level, which the game expects you to do, your Poliwhirl will learn Ice Beam specifically for that, ensuring that you have a way to beat it. Oh yeah, how could I forget the starters? Unlike Fire Red, in this game, you have to start the game with a Poliwhirl, which is very different I guess, but that's because of plot reasons, because that's what Red had in the manga. Then you will always get a Bulbasaur, as that is Manga Red's canonical starter, while your rival canonically has Charmander as a starter, which is weird because in Origins most people associate Charmander with Red, but oh well. I will say that the difficulty of this game is rather tame, particularly if you're using speed up. The one issue is that grinding can be required at points due to some early game level spikes, which honestly, I don't think grinding is a very good game feature, unless it's minimized. One of the only significant flaws of this game is that just like the mainline Pokemon games, the AI can be absolutely awful at times, which really cheapens the late game battles. Early game is still hard enough, but if you build a full team with natural EV values, you will destroy almost everything. But the fact that the AI practically lets you win a lot of the battles is pretty dumb admittedly. Like here where my underleveled Venusaur sweeps this major boss battle, including multiple Pokemon that normally Venusaur would never stand a chance against. This is approaching light platinum levels of silliness. And about the topic of nuzlocking, I nuzlocked 90% of the Kanto region, then just complete the rest without nuzlock rules. This game isn't too hard to nuzlock, but beware the early game will require some grinding. If you don't, you'll probably get wrecked. And because of the cutscenes and plot events, you will be taken by surprise. But because this is a more story heavy experience, nuzlocking this game really isn't required. You can always do what I did in my blind run, which was attempt a nuzlocke, then if I do fail, then just carry on with the game normally. This game does throw really powerful gift Pokemon in static encounters at you. The reason I love the nuzlocke games, such as the mainline games, is precisely because those games, I hate to say, but they really do have bland and forgettable plots. Ruby and Sapphire's villains were so bad in concept and execution that they're not even bad to the point of being a funny meme, like Who Killed Captain Alex. They're so bad that they just suck. So nuzlocking those games makes sense because it generally makes the game more fun, as you can just focus more of your efforts on the gameplay. But if you're playing adventures then, you generally want to experience the story and see what happens in this game. I've almost never experienced the feeling of being blown away by a Pokemon game story, with the exception of maybe Mystery Dungeon or Clover. At the end of the day, play this game how you want to play it. The last point I want to make about this game, to really make you understand how it really goes above and beyond, is the content. This game is long, very long, and it's all interesting and unique content, filled with new cutscenes and characters. The Kanto region took me a few days of non-stop playing to complete. and that's only the main game portion, and even then there were still a bunch of side quests and hidden content in backtrackable areas that I still did not explore. Pretty cool, right? But then you realise that all of that is only a portion of what this game truly offers, because once you beat the Kanto region, there's still so much more to do. The post-game, the Orange Islands become explorable, with a whole new storyline to do involving Kanto's Elite Four, with a new host of characters. Then there's even more new regions and areas, such as the Sevi Islands and so much more. I haven't completed the post-game, but I can say that the post-game is about the same length and content quality as the main game, if not probably even more, meaning if you were to play this game without speed up, it can take you upwards of 100 hours to complete everything. Hot damn! And the best thing is that unlike games like Skyrim, where a lot of the content does boil down to things like radiant quests, repetitive content and random exploration, Adventure Red is plot driven all the way through, meaning you won't be getting bored anytime soon. Overall, Adventure Red is simply fantastic, unique and a big breath of fresh air. If you haven't already played the game for some reason, then what are you waiting for? If you like the anime or manga, you will love this. If you want a plot to immerse yourself into, or simply a new and more adult experience, you'll want to play this. If you don't like cutscenes and just want to play a game that's hard, then you might not like this game as much. I hope to see Pokemon do something similar to this game in the future. However, when I look at what this franchise is up to now, maybe it's better they don't butcher the Pokemon manga, which they most likely would have done. We live in dreams, I guess. So, I hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned something new. From now on, I'm done with the Can You Beat videos. I genuinely feel like these new kinds of videos I'm doing now are simply more interesting. Keep your eyes out for the next video because I'm planning something special for that. You'll see. This is Ding Dong, signing out.